There is a specific intoxicating delusion that takes over your brain when you are successfully hiding an affair. You stop viewing your husband as a human being with thoughts, feelings, and intuition. Instead, you start viewing him as a background character in the movie of your life. You think you are the director. You think you are a brilliant, untouchable mastermind. You convince yourself that because your husband is quiet, routine-oriented, and trusting, he is fundamentally stupid. I was married to an architect named David. David was a man of extreme precision. His entire career was built on noticing the smallest structural flaws, analyzing blueprints, and seeing things that other people missed. He was deeply reliable, fiercely loyal, and completely devoted to me. But in my arrogant, dopamine-addicted mind, his stability felt like a prison. He didn't yell. He didn't make grand, reckless romantic gestures, and he preferred quiet evenings at home to chaotic nights out. I mistook his peace for boredom. My affair partner, Seth, was a charismatic, struggling musician who worked as a bartender at a high-end lounge downtown. Seth was everything David was not. He was unpredictable, highly emotional, and looked at me like I was the only woman on the planet. He constantly told me that I was a caged bird, that my marriage was suffocating my true potential, and that he was the only man who truly understood my soul. He sold me a fantasy of a wild, passionate, unburdened life, and I bought every single word of it. For 7 months, we carried out a flawless double life. Our secret haven was a stunning, secluded A-frame lake house 2 hours north of the city. Seth told me it belonged to his wealthy uncle who never used it, and that we could sneak up there whenever we wanted. We spent long weekends wrapped in blankets by the fireplace, drinking wine, and pretending the real world didn't exist. It was our perfect isolated bubble. When my birthday approached in late October, Seth promised me the ultimate romantic weekend at the lake house. I was ecstatic. I spent a week meticulously crafting my lie. I told David that my marketing firm was sending me on an intensive 3-day corporate leadership retreat at a boring hotel near the airport. David didn't question it for a second. On the Friday morning I was set to leave, he even made me coffee, checked the tire pressure on my SUV, and carried my overnight bag to the trunk. He kissed my forehead, told me he loved me, and told me to learn a lot at my seminars. As I pulled out of the driveway, I looked at him in the rearview mirror. I actually smiled to myself, feeling a sick thrill of superiority. I thought I had him completely fooled. I picked Seth up a few blocks away, and we started the 2-hour drive north. The autumn leaves were stunning, the indie music was playing softly through the speakers, and Seth was holding my hand across the center console. I felt completely invincible. I told Seth that this was the weekend I was finally going to figure out how to ask David for a divorce. Seth kissed my knuckles and told me how proud he was of my bravery. We arrived at the lake house just as the sun was setting behind the trees, casting a beautiful, dark orange glow over the water. Seth grabbed my bags from the trunk, slinging his acoustic guitar over his shoulder, and we walked up the wooden steps to the front porch, laughing and kissing. Seth pushed the heavy oak front door open. I stepped inside, a romantic greeting dying on my lips. The lake house was not empty. The lights were blazing. A massive fire was roaring in the stone fireplace. The smell of catered roasted garlic and steak filled the air. And sitting on the large leather sectional in the center of the living room, holding a glass of scotch, was David. But he wasn't alone. Sitting to his left was my mother. Sitting to his right was my father. And standing by the kitchen island, looking absolutely sick to their stomachs, were David's parents. The entire room fell dead silent the exact millisecond Seth and I walked through the door. My blood didn't just turn to ice. It felt like it completely evaporated from my veins. The air was violently sucked out of my lungs. I froze in the entryway, my hand still resting on the doorknob. Seth bumped into me from behind, let out a confused, panicked noise, and dropped my overnight bag onto the hardwood floor with a loud, echoing thud. I stood there, paralyzed, staring at my family. My mother had her hand clamped over her mouth, tears already streaming down her face. My father's face was dark red, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. I waited for the explosion. I waited for David to scream, to throw his glass of scotch, to charge at Seth. Instead, David took a slow, deliberate sip of his drink. He stood up, smoothed out his sweater, and smiled. It was the most terrifying, empty smile I had ever seen in my entire life. "Surprise, honey," David said, his voice echoing perfectly in the quiet cabin. "Happy birthday." "David," I choked out. My vocal cords felt like they were wrapped in sandpaper. What is this?" "Well, you've been so stressed lately," David said, slowly walking toward the center of the room. "And I know how much you absolutely love this lake house. You've spent so much time here over the last 7 months. So, I figured the best birthday present I could give you was to buy it. We closed on the property on Tuesday. It's officially ours." The room started violently spinning. "He bought it?" "I wanted it to be a surprise," David continued, his tone dangerously conversational. "So I invited your parents and my parents up here for a big family celebration. We even had it catered. But I have to admit, Chloe, I wasn't expecting you to bring a +1 to your own corporate retreat." David turned his cold, analytical eyes toward Seth, who was currently pressing his back against the front door, looking like he was about to pass out from sheer terror. "Mom, Dad, Richard, Mary," David said, gesturing to Seth like he was a museum exhibit. "I don't believe you've met. This is Seth. He's a bartender. And for the last 7 months, he's the man Chloe has been sleeping with in the master bedroom upstairs." My mother let out a loud, heartbroken sob, burying her face in her hands. "David, please stop!" I screamed, the spell of paralysis finally breaking. I ran forward, tears blinding me. "Please let me explain. It's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," David snapped, his voice finally dropping its polite facade and cracking like a whip. "Do not insult my intelligence by lying to me in front of your own parents." My father stood up. He didn't look at David. He walked right up to me, his eyes filled with a level of disgust I had never seen before. "Dad, please," I whimpered, reaching out for him. My father held his hand up, physically stopping me from touching him. "Is it true, Chloe?" he asked, his voice shaking with quiet rage. "Have you been dragging this boy up here behind your husband's back?" I stammered, unable to form a lie under the crushing weight of my father's stare. "She has, Richard," David answered for me. He walked over to the coffee table and picked up a stack of 5 thick, professionally bound folders. He handed one to my father, placed one next to my weeping mother, and handed the others to his own parents. "Those are the phone records, the GPS logs from her car, the hotel receipts from when they couldn't come up here, and printed transcripts of their text messages," David said clinically. "I've known since June. I just needed time to get my legal and financial ducks in a row. And I wanted you all to see exactly who your daughter really is, so she couldn't spin a victim narrative when the divorce papers were filed." I fell to my knees. The humiliation was so absolute, so physically heavy, that my legs simply gave out. I was sobbing hysterically onto the hardwood floor, right in front of the coffee table. "Seth," David said. I looked up through my tears. Seth was frantically trying to get the front door open, but his hands were shaking too badly to turn the deadbolt. "Don't leave yet, Seth. We have some business to conclude," David said, walking over to him. Seth visibly cowered, raising his hands defensively, as if David was going to hit him. But David just pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. "You told Chloe this cabin belonged to your rich uncle," David said, laughing humorlessly. "You lied. It's an Airbnb. And because you're a broke bartender, you couldn't afford the $400 a night rental fee. So you had Chloe pay for it. Which means, Seth, you've been using marital funds, my money, to rent this property." Seth swallowed hard, his face paper white. "Man, I didn't know. She told me she paid for it from her own account, I swear to God." The betrayal hit me like a freight train. The fearless, passionate romantic who promised to rescue me from my boring life was instantly throwing me under the bus to save his own skin. "I don't care what she told you," David said softly. "But as of Tuesday, I am the legal owner of this property. You are currently trespassing. If you are not out of my sight and off my land in exactly 30 seconds, I am calling the sheriff and having you arrested for breaking and entering." "I'm leaving. I'm gone," Seth practically screamed. He finally ripped the door open. He didn't look at me. He didn't offer me a ride. He didn't say a single word in my defense. He grabbed his guitar case, ran down the wooden steps, and sprinted down the long gravel driveway into the pitch-black woods, abandoning me instantly. I stayed on my knees, sobbing in the center of the living room. The silence that followed Seth's exit was deafening. "Mom, Dad, please," I begged, looking at the two people who raised me. My mother couldn't even look at me. She kept her face buried in her hands, crying into my father's shoulder. My father looked down at me, shaking his head. "You had a good man, Chloe," my father whispered, his voice laced with absolute sorrow. "You had a beautiful life, and you threw it away for nothing. We're going home." My father gently helped my mother up from the sofa. David's parents stood up as well. Without a single word, the four of them walked past me, out the front door, and got into my father's car. I listened to the engine start, the tires crunching on the gravel as they drove away, leaving me completely isolated with the man whose life I had tried to destroy. David stood by the fireplace, looking down at me with total, terrifying indifference. There was no love left in his eyes. There wasn't even anger. He looked at me the way an architect looks at a building marked for demolition. "Your bags are packed," David said, pointing to 3 large suitcases sitting by the kitchen island that I hadn't noticed before. "I packed everything you own. The divorce petition is on top of your luggage." "David, please, I have nowhere to go," I sobbed, crawling toward him, grabbing the hem of his jeans. "Seth left in his car. I rode with him. I don't have a way home." David gently but firmly stepped back, pulling his jeans out of my grip. "That's not my problem," David said, walking to the front door. "You can call an Uber. It'll probably cost you about $300 to get back to the city. Better start walking toward the highway to get a signal." "You can't just leave me out here in the dark," I screamed, panic entirely consuming me. "I'm not leaving," David said calmly. "I own this house. I'm going to pour myself another scotch, sit by my fireplace, and enjoy my weekend. You have exactly 5 minutes to take your bags and start walking down my driveway before I lock you out." He wasn't bluffing. He stood by the open door, waiting. I dragged myself off the floor. My entire body was shaking, my expensive clothes stained with tears and dust. I grabbed the handles of my heavy suitcases, the divorce papers fluttering in my trembling hands. I walked out the front door, stepping out into the freezing autumn air. As soon as my foot hit the bottom step, David closed the heavy oak door. The deadbolt clicked with a loud, final snap. I was left standing in the pitch black of the driveway, 2 hours from home, abandoned by my lover, disowned by my parents, and completely locked out of the life I had so arrogantly thrown away.